The pandemic debt we incurred to keep Canadians safe and solvent must be paid down, and it is being paid down. This is our fiscal anchor. This is a line we will not cross. It will ensure that our finances remain sustainable. Canada has a proud tradition of fiscal responsibility. It is my duty to maintain it, and I will.
Chrystia Freeland there, tabling her second budget today with some heckling on the other side, and a promise, she says, of more fiscal restraint. So what are the politics behind the numbers? What does it mean for Canadians? It's Thursday and budget day, and I'm here with that issue. Chantal Hebert, Andrew Coyne, Althia and Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Good to see all of you again, because we have all spoken already. But let's see if your thoughts have changed since when we talked in the afternoon. Chantal, what does this budget, what is the political signal this budget sends, do you think?
A number of them. The first, that the government now has time and is planning to use it. This is the first budget since 2018 that is neither a pre-election budget, think of it, or a pandemic budget. And that probably explains why it's the federal budget that I've watched over the years that has so many strings that are unattached. It's almost like chapter headings, more to follow, which is somewhat interesting. On the political side, beyond the need to ensure that the NDP will support it, I think the way it was framed was meant to reassure so-called blue liberals, the liberals who are more to the right and who worried that the brand of the party as a fiscal manager was going to be destroyed by disagreement with the NDP. I'm not sure that it will work, but on that score, the government tonight is getting most of the headlines it wanted.
And do you think that will work, Andrew, that it will reassure some of the Liberals out there who were worried about whether the government could remain fiscally responsible?
It depends if they can do basic mathematics or not. If you actually look at the numbers rather than the rhetoric, this is the third largest spending budget in the history of the country. That's after inflation, after population growth. You look at the spending track for the next 5 years, it's $11 billion more than it was just 5 months ago per year. So no, it wasn't a particularly restrained budget. It just wasn't as large as some of the rhetoric pre-budget being thrown around might suggest it was. What is notable about it is they do seem to have realized at long last that we have a growth problem in this country. And there's lots of stuff in the budget that it makes clear that they realize that. They just don't seem to know what to do about it. The proposals in here are not particularly inspiring and not particularly novel. It's the same approach that we've heard from this and previous governments many times. And the other thing is they seem to have been caught between various imperatives of things they might want to do with all the revenues that have come soaring in. So some of it went to reducing the deficit more than it was previously. Some of it went to the military, although not very much, frankly. They're going to raise military spending from 1.4% of GDP to 1.5% of GDP. And some of it went to social spending. So you add it all up and it's a fair bit of spending, but not really much of a thrust or a coherent philosophy underlying it all.
What did you make of it, Althia? I mean, it's less spending than the last time, but we've become sort of accustomed to a huge amount of spending because of the pandemic.
Because of the pandemic and also because of what the Liberals have signaled for years now that were their focus areas, which were to reduce income inequality, to reduce poverty. And you have a budget that I think shows a fair bit of restraint, especially when you compare the Liberals to where they were last year, where they were the year before, there wasn't a budget the year before, but the year before that. Yeah, so I mean, there's nothing on long-term care. Long-term care was supposed to be, the COVID lesson that we had all learned, that our seniors were living in squalor and that we should really do something about this. Not a mention of it. They've talked about things before, like employment insurance, disability benefit, regrouping that. Disability benefit is not mentioned at all in here. Pharmacare is punted until 2023. If they had wanted to pursue their old track, they could have. This is a a departure from that. This is clearly a signal that Minister Freeland wants to send, that she is focused on long-term growth, that she is part of the, and we talked about this earlier today, but the Martin Kretzay, and I think that quote that you played speaks perfectly to that. She wants to associate herself with that part of the party. And frankly, I don't think anybody would have said that about her until this point, because she was not part of the Bill Morneau, Scott Bryson's back in 2015.
Okay, Elamin, on whether the government here is, as we've sort of been saying, going back to where it was in terms of spending, and I'm not saying it's restrained, but a different level of spending.
I mean, certainly this budget differs from the previous few budgets in the sense that every past budget for the last 4 years or so has had a significant thing that you could point at, a significant initiative that you could point at and say, this essentially amounts to direct stimulus. Where they're showing restraint is in not having any of those. And certainly the folks who are worried about inflation will be happy about that, because that would be certainly one of the worries of how this government has been treating budgets. But as Chantal said, they have a bit of time. Which is why so many of those subheadings look like just subheadings. I mean, the idea of this dental care plan, it's so short that it's so short on details that one assumes that those details are about to come. I think when we look at where most of the spending is, so for example, we look at the significant increase in where they want to tackle housing, that is a thing that I want to focus on. And, for all the amount of money that this budget spends on housing, it just promises to study this rise of investment firms owning more and more houses, what experts have been calling for years the financialization of housing, the idea that all these investment firms are basically using housing as a safe investment vehicle to get a significant return pretty quickly. The fact that they're only promising to study that, I think, is something that is worrying, because we've been seeing this trend increase for quite a bit of time. It's doubled, I think, in the last just couple of years, and only promising to study it doesn't really reassure people who want to do something about that quickly.
Chantal.
Yes, but where you see the buy-in time is in the we're going to have a review of defense policy, which actually brings them to 2025 and the next election, rather than all the bells and whistles that you saw in some of the previous budgets that were actually meant to be like, do you see this babble? Vote for us. Yeah. So on that score, you can say that this budget is a change from minority budgets as a result of the NDP accord with the Liberals. But I would also say that if you're making people happy if you're making people on the right side feel reassured, and clearly that's happening at the same time as the NDP is going around saying we can support this, you probably have accomplished something politically.
Justin Trudeau is basically taking money that he's been collecting from Canadians who are suffering because of inflation, and he's using it to pay for the promises that he made to the NDP, and in turn, they're going to prop him up.
The budget reflects the priorities that we laid out and the agreement that we have, and so it honored that agreement, and it has really important things that are going to make a big difference in people's lives.
Some of the political reaction and response from the opposition parties. The NDP says, not surprisingly, it will support the budget after making that deal. Let's get back to at issue. Chantal, Andrew, Althia, and Elamin. Althia, you start us off. When you look at this budget, can you say to yourself, oh, I understand why the NDP reached that deal with the government?
Yes, but not because of what's in the budget. So I guess maybe that's a no. I understand why the NDP wants to show to potential New Democrat voters that they can affect change, and that they are not a vote for the NDP is not a vote that will help elect a Conservative government. But in terms of the wins in this budget, I mean, pharmacare is so vague. Department officials won't even say whether or not it's going to be a federally run program or a provincially run program. The other things in the budget that the NDP is claiming credit for, on housing, for example, these are things I'm not convinced the Liberals would not have done, because they were things that were found in their party platform. I think the real difficulty for Mr. Singh, frankly, is on this huge ticket item, $7.1 billion over the next 8 years, is the carbon capture, utilization, and storage investment tax credit, which basically gives fossil fuel companies the ability to keep pumping out more fossil fuel and greenhouse gas emissions, and using a technology that may not work as well as we would like it to. And the government says 20 to 40 projects may be going on board. I think it's really hard for Mr. Singh to go back and say, after it's in his agreement that there's no fossil fuel subsidies, the government should get rid of them, that this is not one, because he's called it one. And for people on the left who were really concerned that the planet is burning and that we have 3 years left to affect change, how can the NDP be supporting a government that is going in this direction? I think that's very tricky. And for Candice Bergen, I will say it seems like she didn't read the budget before she came out to talk to Canadians about it. The criticisms were not even factually correct. So, in saying that all of the inflation money and additional revenues were already spent, that's just not true.
Elamin.
I mean, certainly when I look at both clips that we just played when we got back from break, I would look at both of those and say neither of those are true. The notion that this budget is some kind of NDP boogeyman budget is clearly not true at all. And like Althia said, it does not seem that Candice Bergen actually read that budget before responding to it. But nor do I buy the notion that Jagmeet Singh believes that his party got the wins that they were looking for. They may have gotten signals at those wins, and maybe they will be coming sometime in the future. But the Liberals really did manage to buy time while returning us to the suggestion that the most immediate fight is inflation. And so the most immediate thing they're going to do is not spend a lot of money on stimulus in this moment. What happens next, we don't know. Certainly none of that was suggested in today's budget.
Andrew, you wanted in there?
Well, it does show you how thin an agreement that really was. It really didn't commit the Liberals to do a great deal more than what they'd already promised or signaled they were going to do, with the exception of the dental care plan, which is in this deal, or in this budget. But for the most part, it committed them to do what they were going to do anyway. And mostly it was about not so much sparing the Liberals from an election, but sparing the NDP from an election. And spared them the embarrassment of having to stand up every time and say whether they're going to support it. Now he can say, look, we had this deal. It has to be something really extraordinary for him to back out of the deal. Maybe he'll find some reason in the future. But for now, this gives him cover. And as uncomfortable as he looked today, he would have looked a lot more uncomfortable without it.
Yeah, I think what he said was it was sufficient, which isn't
That's right.
the best characterization.
Faint praise.
Yes, right. Chantal.
Yeah, well, 3 years is a long time, and the proof in the pudding of this deal is not going to be based on this single budget. Yeah. That being said, let's be fair here. How many times did we talk about the NDP until 3 weeks ago? They were well on their way to be totally irrelevant in this parliament. And to the point of, and I do believe, yes, Althia is right, that the climate change issue can be a problem for them, except that their own platform wasn't very strong on it. Yeah. But if you compare dental care, which most people understand readily, and the intricacies of what's happening in the budget on climate change, I think you would know what people will understand from it. So for now, I don't think that the NDP is on a losing streak. It's not as if they were in the mist of glory before they struck this deal.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for doing double or triple duty today on the budget. I appreciate it very much.